Welcome back. It's Beyond the Box Score Week 2. You know us from our early Beyond the Box Score, our Monday show. But this year, as you saw from last week, we're doing an extended Beyond the Box Score in the FFT Express show because Jacob and I always want to talk football. And there's too much stuff to get to. We can't fit it all in on Beyond the Box Score. So for deep dives, we had to create another show. And so there's a lot to talk about today, Jacob. I mean, I'll start by saying this. I know a lot of you already know about it, but some of you don't. Jacob has the FFT, Fantasy Football Today newsletter, and he does a newsletter every single day. And I got to tell you, man, this is a free newsletter. It's the deepest dive you're going to get from a stats, from an actionable advice standpoint. There was one this week on coverage data from week 1 with literally 15 different actionable advice for 15 different situations based on what we're going to see this week from a matchup standpoint. We're not going to get into that today because there's more stuff to get to. You can find that all in the newsletter. And for those who don't know, you can sign up for that by just typing into Google Fantasy Football Today newsletter. Bang, the first link, you're going to be able to click it, put your email in, and you got it. Jacob's in your inbox every single day. But today, we want to get to something that we haven't talked about a lot. We didn't talk about it on Monday's show, Jacob, and we haven't talked about it just yet in the newsletter. It might be coming. And that's your running back mega thread. So much of this is fun for me because I love getting into run scheme and blocking scheme. To me, it's one of the most interesting parts of football, and so many different coordinators do it so differently. And you did a mega thread breaking down some interesting and unique notes from week 1 that will carry over to week 2. And we're going to find actionable advice from this. So I want to start by breaking down the Bucks running game under Liam Cohen. Now, Liam Cohen, for those who don't know, he came over from the Rams, so he got to work a little bit with McVay, and we got to see some of the stuff that they did in run game. But he also was the coordinator for Will Levis, the only season where Will Levis looked competent at the collegiate level at Kentucky, and really, in my mind, made Will Levis the prospect because the year after Will Levis was massive regression at the collegiate level. People blamed it on the OC, but we'll see if that proves true because Jacob, I'll be honest with you, I think Will Levis is the next Daniel Jones in the NFL level, just with a bigger arm. But let's get to that Bucks run scheme.
Yeah, the deepest dive, the FFT newsletter. Some might say too deep. No, I filled out this form. It's a Google form where all the newsletter people can interact with me and like give me feedback and stuff. Tons of feedback. Thank you guys so much. Except it's almost all positive. There's like 200 comments and they're all just like, "You're killing it." I'm like, "No, I'm looking for actual feedback. How can we improve here?"
I can't believe you're calling for more haters. I can't. So that shows how just fresh and new Jacob Gibbs is to the industry and this life that we live. And he is a newcomer on the scene. He's been doing his thing for a while, but now he's kind of breaking out, getting his recognition. But man, if you're asking for haters, you have no idea, buddy. They're coming. Just wait.
Just trying to get better, man. And people on Twitter say I'm not. It's crazy. Okay, so yeah, the RB mega thread is actually mostly focused on usage-based notes, which is the most important thing, especially the running back position. Now, I love getting into the weeds with all these other advanced stats. I love watching the film and everything and trying to decide, like, is this player good? Or is this schemer good? Is this coach good? What's this matchup like? But at the end of the day, usage is king, especially at running back. And so that's what the main purpose of the RB mega thread is on Twitter. I'm hoping to do that for as long as I can over the first month or so at least, and just keep y'all updated each week on what we're seeing, how things are shifting in each backfield. At the conclusion of the mega thread, once I've hit on as many backfields as I can, I will throw in this rush scheme data. And so this is something, if you guys have been reading the newsletter for some time, you might remember that I hit on it at the beginning of the summer, and then again after we had some preseason information and got to look at some of what these new coordinators were doing. And now, before we hopped on here, I just looked and saw what did we get in week 1, and actually found a lot of really interesting things. So Liam Cohen in Tampa Bay, yeah, he helped Will Levis. He also coached Ray Davis during his breakout season.
Yep.
Ray Davis played 4 years and didn't do a whole lot until his 5th year with Cohen. And I was pretty optimistic about how Cohen might be able to help Tampa Bay's running game. The run game in Tampa Bay has literally been the worst in the NFL over the past 2 years. And I think a big part of hiring Cohen was hope that he could fix that. In the preseason, he used a lot of zone rushing, particularly outside zone rushing. And so that was one of the things that I hit on in the preseason thread that I did, where I looked at all the changes and how you speculate on how these running backs might fit these schemes. I was not sure how Bucky, Irving, and Rashad White might fit this outside zone rushing scheme. And the other thing is that Cohen uses a lot of under center rushing, and that is not something that either one of these running backs have done. At Oregon, Bucky was almost exclusively running out of the shotgun. Same with Rashad White in college and in his first couple of years as a pro. And so I'm going to give you a little bit of data on these guys, and then I really want to throw it to you and see what you think. You've watched both of these guys quite a bit. Of course, we've got the infamous moment last year with you and Rashad White that came from you watching his film. So I definitely want to get your opinion. So in week one, 56% of Bucky's rushes were man or gap runs. Also, Dan, if you want to, when I throw it to you to just kind of clarify what we're talking about with zone and gap blocking, go ahead. 11% of Bucky's runs were outside zone runs. Rashad White, on the other hand, had 53% outside zone, 11% man gap. So there's a clear distinction in like how they were using the two. I'm curious if that will carry forward or if it's just a one game sample size thing. But I watched all Bucky's preseason runs and I thought he was at his worst on the outside zone.
Mm-hmm.
I think what they like about Bucky is the decisiveness that he brings, especially on those inside runs relative to Rashad White, who that's been a problem for him. So that could be just this is the direction they want to take the run game a little bit more, and Bucky fits that a little bit better, which is interesting to me. So yeah, Tampa Bay, 54% of their plays were in the shotgun in week one. And that was about what we saw in the preseason as well. That was 24th in the NFL in week one. On runs, though, only 20% of the runs were in the shotgun. That was lower than any team in week one. And again, 97% of Bucky's attempts at Oregon came with the gun, 85
Right.
for Rashad White. So how do you think these two fit this scheme, given what we've seen so far?
Yeah, I like the fact that this is a multiple scheme in the sense that, we've seen over the years teams like and amazing when it comes to scheming the pass, Kevin O'Connell, but at times he's been pretty stagnant, I think, in the run game, just running a lot of zone. Similar things happened in Seattle a couple years ago when they had Shane Waldron. But those coaches have evolved, but I like to see Liam Cohen coming in and having a multiple run game that can use power gap and that can use man schemes and that can use outside zone and that can go under center or from the gun. I think it's really impressive and important to note that Bucky Irving already looks so comfortable from runs with the quarterback under center after, like you said, mostly running out of shotgun at college. That could take time for a running back. The fact that he's picked it up so fast, the fact that they're able to run power gap. I'll tell you this, Jacob, if you ask, besides like McVay and some of these coaches and like Shanahan that design their whole run scheme around outside zone, if you ask most coaches, they would love to be able to run power gap all game. Like if you're actually able to execute those plays, it's a higher upside and it's more efficient. But those plays have a higher downside too. You can have backside pursuit and you could have those plays cut off from the start. So if they're already finding success with Bucky Irving, they're going to probably lean on it. It's going to be probably something that we're going to be looking at moving forward. I think the actionable advice here, if you're asking me, is that this run game will evolve as the season goes, and it'll probably evolve around Bucky Irving. The fact that we already seen him in week one, no hesitancy to use him. I don't think they'll ever take Rashad White out of the mix because he's so much better in the passing game and he's still, a consistent player. But when it comes to the passing game, but look, if he's not going to be able to operate on an efficient level in the run game, that's when you start to consider like, as long as this stuff's working with Irving, and it was last week, Washington defense, obviously, we need to factor that in. That defense is going to be rough this year. But I could see that offense evolving around Irving to some extent, which is really interesting. He's somebody who I wouldn't leave on any benches. I mean, on any waiver wires right now. This is the type of guy you want at that back end of your bench. Like, he's one injury away from being a featured back in my mind. And even so, he could be a flex option moving forward.
Yeah, man. I'm so excited for Bucky. All right, let's talk about Joe
And you were
Mixon.
right. Before we do that, you were right, by the way. It just reminds me of the newsletter you did, Decimating, titled one of your best headlines you've ever crafted, titled Decimating Dan Schneier's Rankings. And
Pathetic
you,
rankings.
pathetic rankings, I should add. And you said, like, Dan's too low on Rashad White, and I don't understand the Rashad White thing. And you said, at least if you're going to be this way, back it up by being high on Bucky Irving. And I looked at it and I was like, you know what? You're right. Like, I'm low on White for the reasons that we already discussed. But why did I not have Irving higher than that group that he's in of those kind of, I don't want to call them handcuff running backs. They're not that, especially Irving proving he's not that already.
We're
But those
calling
like
them
secondary
injury
backs.
contingent running
Yes.
backs this year. That's what we're calling them.
Sure. And I think we've learned already, and maybe, I mean, part of it for me was I fell for that Coach Speak Index where there was one little clip from Liam where he was just Liam Cohen, the coordinator, where he was like, Rashad White's our guy. Like, he's going to be the workhorse guy. We'll find stuff for Bucky. And like week one, they found a lot for Bucky Irving already. So, sometimes you have to bet on the talent. And that was a bet I was not willing to make enough of. So I love Bucky Irving's talent, and I should have made a bigger bet on him. And now, if he's on a waiver wire, claim him.
Yeah. So one note I wanted to make, just I should have done this at the outset, honestly. The reason that I'm focused on this is there's two recent examples that stand out to me. When it comes to the Tampa Bay thing, we're kind of just speculating and seeing how this might shift going forward. It's just a note to be aware of. But last year, Damian Pierce, I think a big reason that he failed is he did not fit the run scheme in Houston, which
Yeah.
is a good segue to Joe Mixon, who we're about to talk about. And that was not something I was aware of. Like I was sort of aware of it, but I didn't understand how pronounced the splits were for Pierce, specific run schemes going into the year. And that was something that Scott Barrett brought to my attention. The other one is Kyron Williams was one of the absolute worst among like over 100 qualified college running backs as a zone rusher, but was one of the best as a man gap rusher. And I don't
Yes.
think anyone really knew that or talked about that because when you think about Kyron, he wasn't people didn't like him as a rusher, as a prospect, you know? And then we see McVay, who's been trying to get rid of Cam Akers, it seems like for years, moves to this more man heavy rush scheme last year and just bullies people with Kyron and with the big offensive line. And if you look at the collegiate data for Cam Akers, literally the worst out of well over 100 running backs at man rushing. And so I do think there are instances where this can be really valuable to understand which running backs are better at which and how they fit specific coaching schemes and what they want to do, especially if it's like a running back where that coach didn't, want him in the first place. He inherited him. But on that note, Houston did bring in Joe Mixon. You've talked all summer about how you think he fits really well. What you see in week one?
Well, I'll start by saying this. I really like the point you just brought up, Jacob, from more of a macro level. Like, we're looking for edges in fantasy football. We're looking for actionable advice. We're looking for ways to kind of help the listeners get one step ahead of the people they're competing against. And we've looked for different ways, targets per route run. We found some sticky advanced sticks over time. But I think when you look at just the scheme, that's where you can really find stuff that people aren't picking up on. So I love that you brought that up. The Kyron Williams example is the best example of all because that is what McVay did last year. He turned that offense into duos up front. And when Jacob says man and I say power gap, it's the same thing. It's a different style of blocking, and and what McVay did last year with that interior offensive line, and they added even more beef this offseason. Obviously, there's issues right now with injuries on that line. We know that. But as they get through it and as they get healthier, what he did with that offensive line and just changing that whole blocking scheme, it changed the whole offense too. It allowed the play action game for Matthew Stafford. It allowed different boxes, different situations on the outside for Puka Nacua. So just keep an eye on that. And as we transition to Mixon, I think it's another kind of interesting macro point, Jacob, because in the past, as a fantasy analyst, dude, I would have never been as in on Mixon as I was this offseason. He was the easy fade, like older running back, drafted in the range where I usually always draft wide receivers. But for me, it was the scheme that changed me and made me such a Mixon believer this offseason because I looked at the tape and I was like, this outside zone scheme is going to show us a different version of Mixon than we've seen on tape for so long. So everyone's so used to the Bengals version of Mixon, and there's so much tape on it. And I made the case in the offseason, Jacob, but I honestly do believe the Bengals have the most bland and unsuccessful run scheme in the entire NFL. I don't really think that they put much time into it, and it shows on tape. But you get Mixon under center in an outside zone scheme, and I felt like he was going to show something that he hasn't put on tape in a while. And that's exactly what he did in week one, right? Like he looks so comfortable running in that scheme behind that offensive line from under center finally, not just always in the gun like he was with the Bengals. So it's interesting. I think sometimes you got to take like in fantasy football, you can't just be like, I always take receivers in this range. I never want to be a guy taking an older running back in the range where you can get a receiver. Because there's sometimes where the scheme, like you said, could really dictate success. And I don't want to take a victory lap just yet on Mixon, Jacob, because injuries could happen. There's still the anti-fragility argument. But man, does he look good behind that offensive line.
Yeah, Mixon was one where I truly just didn't want to take him. I didn't want it to be true that he might get 30 rushing attempts. But you were spot on. He fits the system really well. It's interesting. Like, I'm curious. I was actually, as you were talking, I was pulling up like the running backs who have the most outside zone rushes. I'm curious how much it matters for running backs in outside zone schemes to be good at avoiding tackles and stuff like that. Because a lot of the advanced stats that I look at, I just like off the top of my head, like Christian McCaffrey,
Right.
actually doesn't check out all that well in some of those stats, but he fits that system so well in San Francisco. And then Mixon is kind of that guy too, where he doesn't avoid a lot of tackles, but he's now going to a really zone heavy rushing scheme. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yes, I do. And I think that's a great point by you. And I think, if as we move forward and we look for like how we can get an edge by chasing blocking schemes and looking for how people fit it, keep that in mind because if you're in an outside zone scheme, the whole idea of it is to one cut and get vertical. That's not going to
Mhm.
lead to a lot of force missed tackles and a huge force missed tackle rate and all these charting stats that can make you look really good. And we know over time it's been sticky and it's been a good idea to chase the running backs with good force missed tackle rates, good yards after contact. But that's not the only, as you said, in an outside blocking zone scheme, don't look for that at all almost. And that's why I like Mixon so much. I felt like on film, the few times the Bengals let him do it, he could plant that foot, get vertical, and really understand spatial awareness and where to make those cuts. So I think as we look to different, some of these outside blocking schemes, definitely keep an eye on that. I also think, with the Mixon situation, it was just, you said it best in your, I think it was your Texans newsletter, Jacob, or one of the shows we did. Like, Bobby Slowick wasn't going to reinvent the wheel this year just because they added Stephon Diggs. He was very run heavy in neutral situations, and that scheme is still predicated on their run game and on the blocking scheme. So that's the thing you also have to keep an eye on, like coaching tendencies in that regard.
I did too much witch casting with Mixon. I was like, can we just please pass more on first
Can we
down?
go to 11 personnel more? No, we can't.
I felt pretty good taking Nico still, just because he's so
Yeah.
dang good. But honestly, I should have had more Mixon. Okay, so on the outside zone rushing note, I want to move on to Seattle and Ryan Grubb. He used a lot of outside zone. That's typically what we've seen with Ken Walker. In the preseason, the Seattle was trying out a little bit more man gap rushing, which I was kind of excited for because I have a lot of Zach Charbonnet bags in Dynasty, and that's a better fit for him. Ken Walker has been better as a zone rusher in college and as a pro. But the note that I really want to bring up for Ken Walker is that Ryan Grubb is creating a lot of light boxes, and I think that has a lot to do with the personnel that they're using. It could just be a one-game thing, so don't overreact to this, how drastic of a change this is. But here's Kenneth Walker's percentage of rushes versus light boxes by season. Rookie season, 38%. Last year, 43%. First game of 2024, 70%. Rushes versus light boxes have been 24% more efficient. Of course, you're facing fewer defenders up front. And to me, it's like, man, if we can get Ken Walker out in space more often with less congestion at the line of scrimmage, like he's the guy who can just bounce that and create a huge play. So I'm really excited to see that big change. The other guy who saw a really drastic change, and this probably is not going to be the case over the next month or so, depending on when Jordan Love comes back, but Josh Jacobs saw significantly fewer loaded boxes in his first game with Green Bay, which I think is more about the threat of the passing game than the personnel, like comparing the two offenses, Green Bay to Seattle. It's a little bit heavier in Green Bay. But that was encouraging and something that might be the case later in the season. But the real note that's exciting to me when I dug into Green Bay stuff is that they're using way more man gap rushing. They're kind of leaning into, we see Matt LaFleur kind of leaning into the Sean McVay, kind of taking a little note from Sean McVay. And I think it makes total sense. This is something I speculated in the offseason that they might do this because of the guys that they brought in. Josh Jacobs has been much, much better as a man gap rusher. And then Marshawn Lloyd is literally like 99th percentile, 98th percentile as a man gap rusher in college and last as a zone rusher in college. I think the only running back that was better as a man gap rusher was Tyjae Spears, which the Titans are using a lot of man gap rushing. I don't know if it'll matter for Spears and Pollard over there just because we don't believe in Will Levis and what's going on there. But yeah, Green Bay is using much more of the man rushing, and I think that's really exciting for their backfield and their offense as a whole. I think that they can just, with these runs, they can kind of keep the offense on track a little bit better than they have in the past. So I'm pretty excited for that. Do you have any thoughts on Seattle or Green Bay?
Yeah, definitely. The first one, obviously, Seattle. This was kind of the hope when you bring in Ryan Grubb, because anyone who watched a lot of Michael Penix tape, which I did because the Giants might have been in the mix for him, didn't take him, could see how well he did that at the collegiate level. I mean, that's how the system operated. I was always concerned with how it would translate that system to the NFL, because in the collegiate game, obviously, with the rules with the hash marks, it's much easier to design plays into space because you have the whole field side, and it's totally different than the NFL level. But seemed like from week one, Jacob, in the preseason, he did a pretty damn good job of that. So now I'm on that excited side. And like you mentioned, the numbers show it. Kenneth Walker is going to see lighter boxes this year. Any running back who's going to be in that system is going to see lighter boxes this year. Obviously, you're going to need Charles Cross to hold up from a health standpoint because, man, did Charles Cross look good last week. And I love Charles Cross coming out. So I'm still kind of a little bit snake bitten and bitter that the Giants got Evan Neal instead of Charles Cross in that draft class. And it's really hurting them right now. But I love watching Charles Cross on tape because his feet were always good, and he's able to anchor down despite not being the biggest tackle. So if that line can continue to play the way they did in week one, and wasn't perfect, but it was better, I think you'll see that. Now, as far as Green Bay goes, I was much, much, much higher on Josh Jacobs this year versus consensus for all the reasons you said, man. I thought he was going to see lighter boxes, and I was hoping he was going to get more power gap, which, like you said, wasn't always a staple of LaFleur's offenses. He's a zone-based guy pretty much for most of his career coaching. So I love that he's willing, and that's something I've always known. Like, if you look into it, LaFleur is one of the more underrated coaches in the NFL. His ability to adapt, what he's done with different quarterbacks. But this is another example of that. He's operating and using more power gap. So those are two run games to be excited about. I think you might have buy low opportunities on both those players. Walker, because he's a little hurt right now, could send out some trade offers and get that. And Jacobs, because you can sell the manager you're trading with. Look, Jordan Love's out for 4 weeks. Jacobs is going to be a disaster for those weeks. They're not going to score a lot of points. Good, get him. And then you get him for the easy part of the schedule and Love is back. So I'm really excited about that, Jacob.
LaFleur cracks me up. I will agree that he's one of the most underrated schemers and play callers and play designers,
Sure.
but man, the Shanahan coaches cannot seem to figure out clock.
Oh, no. From
It
that
was like
standpoint.
full display in week 1 again. It's so
Yeah.
funny, man.
As an overall head coach, there are things that left to be desired, especially from a clock management standpoint. But on that note, we're going to take our first break. And when we
Oh,
come back,
Arizona. We've got to talk about Arizona.
oh, yeah, sorry. I want to give you time to talk about Arizona. Let's talk Arizona.
I found this really weird note. So Arizona used pull lead runs on 59% of their runs in week 1. Last year, they were second in the NFL with a 13% rate. The highest rate was 19% last year. Arizona's was at 59% in week 1. So what are these runs? What are these pull lead runs? They were exclusively shotgun runs, and really they almost exclusively looked like read options with Kyler Murray. He did take it a few times. Another note was that all 3 of Trey Benson's runs came as pull lead runs out of the shotgun. I thought this was really interesting because when I think of this offense, it is multiple, but also I think of Drew Petzing and just the Stefanski background being kind of, slow, grinded out under center offense. And they do that. But this is a really interesting change. I wonder if it had something to do with the matchup or if it's something we're going to continue to see. The other notes that I have is that pull lead runs in 2023 were more efficient, 4.5 yards per rush compared to 4.2 on other runs. And then they created way more yards before contact, 3.3 to 2.8, which may not seem like a significant difference, but it actually is when you're dealing with such a small number. I think it's really interesting. As I watched all the runs, I think there were 13 of them. They're pulling the guard and they're getting the tight ends involved as well out in space. There's also some misdirections where sometimes they have multiple guys in the backfield and it's the option and defenses can't quite tell where they're going. And then if they get it out in space and it's clean, I think it's similar to kind of like a zone read outside run, except they also had the pull. And so like it was a bit jumbled up in this first game. It wasn't super successful, but like if they're committed to this and this is something they've been working on all offseason, I'm really excited. And I think this coaching staff is really adaptable. And so there might be matchups where if they can iron this out, where they can really take advantage of defenses, whether that's smaller, more agile defenses or whatever the case may be. I just love this offense and I'm really excited. We're going to talk about them more, especially the passing game, but I just wanted to bring this note up. No one else is doing this. I've never seen anything like this. I'm definitely going to shoot Nate Tice of Yahoo Fantasy a message about this because like he loves Arizona and I want to get his thoughts on it because he has a big background with run game and everything. Like he'll have something interesting, I think. I just wanted to bring that up.
Yeah, no, it's an excellent point. And look, like you just broke it down perfectly. It was proven to give the offense an edge last year, and it shows what you said. The coaching staff is adaptable. We've mentioned multiple times on Beyond the Box Score through the last month or so, Jacob, that we believe Drew Petzing is like on that Ben Johnson level of maybe the next guy up at offensive coordinator that you got to look for, the guy that designs good offenses. And I feel like in this situation, he's designing offense around the skills that the players he has, which is always a big crux for coaches. Like the best ones are doing that because if you have a quarterback like Kyler Murray who can pull that and can use the rushing threat, and more importantly, like go watch Trey Benson at Florida State. This is a perfect way to utilize Trey Benson and his skill set. This is about the best way you could possibly use it. I'm not saying they did it for Trey Benson because James Conner can operate this too, but I feel like given the fact that Kyler Murray is that quarterback and you could it's like a pseudo zone read type of situation, you get an edge there. You're getting, one fewer guy and you have one fewer defender in the box, whoever it may be. You have a little bit of an edge in the box there. So I'm looking forward to watching that. I didn't get a chance to watch Arizona this week on tape, so that's something I'm going to look at
I was so
when we come
excited to
to it.
see like Kyler and Benson in the backfield doing this.
Yeah.
It's like, man, this could break. This could be something big. Whereas like in the preseason, Benson's runs were so frustrating. It was just like
Yes.
up the middle, up the middle, up the middle, like nothing.
Show
So
nothing in the preseason. Good
right,
coordinator
yeah,
do that as well. All
a
right.
lot. Yeah.
On that note, we're going to take our first break. But when we come back, I'm really excited about what happens when we come back. So we're bringing on Danny Kelly of The Ringer because Danny Kelly is the man. He's decided to join us for this show, and we're excited to get him on, help us get beyond the box score off the ground. But before we do that, I do want to take a quick break to hear a word from our sponsor.
Mr. Richard?
Yeah, Doc.
Unfortunately, Mr. Nibbles crossed the Rainbow Bridge moments ago.
He was the best hamster I have ever known.
I know this is a difficult time for you, but would you happen to know of any deep stash dynasty tight ends I could zero in on for my draft tonight?
Jatavion Sanders.
Thank you. I'm sorry for your loss.
All right, we're back, and we're welcoming on Danny Kelly of The Ringer. Danny, I want to let you start this off. I see that. Is that a Seahawks hat you got going right there?
Mariners, actually.
Mariners. Yeah. Always repping Seattle. Always repping Seattle.
I mean, I'm not exactly like the biggest Mariners fan. I'm just kind of, it's just tradition at this point to root for the Mariners. I don't really like them that much. They're a really frustrating team, but yeah.
Well, all I know is I love listening to you on the Ringer Fantasy Football Show. I think that show does a really good job. For those who haven't heard it, you should check it out, of blending the two things I want out of a podcast, which is expertise, but also fun and like enjoyable content. Like, because that's a big factor that I always talk about with Jacob since we're starting our own podcast here. It's like you have to be entertaining or this is not fun to listen to. It doesn't matter how many stats you got. And this is a problem for me at times and for all of us. We all try to find that balance. So I think you do an excellent job of that, Danny. So obviously continue to do that. But thanks for joining us today, man. And let us know what's going on in your world.
Yeah, man, it's just drinking from a fire hose right now in terms of just trying to figure out everything that's going on in the NFL. I love all the work that you guys both do in terms of just utilization and trying to point out tendencies and everything. So kudos to you guys for putting out such good information.
I want to just chime in and say that I also love the Ringer podcast and like the creativity that it takes to like keep coming up with fresh angles on making things fun. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Like framing things in fun ways. I noticed myself just like dun like all day today because of that segment.
Yeah.
Podcast. Like it's just fun, man. It's good stuff. And then there was like really good stats too. Like it's such a good show.
I appreciate it.
It's an excellent show, but we want to talk a little football with you because we know that it's that time of year. So let's start with this one. Has a contingency upside of like this is something we discussed on a call earlier this week. Jacob, you weren't on this, but just discussing like the importance of like where are fantasy managers at when it comes to the handcuff running back situation. With obviously the situation with Jordan Mason this past week. So I wanted to know, has the contingency upside for running back handcuff for the tier of running back handcuffs, let's call it, shifted for you at all? For example, like Blake Corum, impacted a little bit by Ronnie Rivers, who we didn't expect seeing playing time. Are you like, are these guys that are still your high-end bench stashes, or have you moved forward to other players?
Well, I'm not giving up on Corum just yet. I think McVay is an interesting coach in terms of just like the decision making he makes and who he trusts and how that all kind of shakes out. I guess there's a chance that he just didn't see enough from Corum in the preseason to like get him that role as the number 2, and maybe this will just end up being like a big what to do about nothing. But I don't know, the way that he plays and the way he played in college, he just seems like the type of guy that really fits the McVay style. Like he's really reliable. He's not gonna like do like try and bounce around that they got like for the B gap or whatever. Like he's just like very much just by the book. I feel like he's a professional, quote unquote professional type of running back. So I feel like he's still going to be the guy if Kyron gets hurt, and I'm still hanging on to him at least for the time being. Just to see kind of how it all goes. Because Kyron Williams has like a extensive injury history. They just really, seem determined to slam him into the offensive line as many times as possible, or defensive line, I should say. So I'm sticking with Corum like tentatively still. I'm not dropping him quite yet, but we'll have to see kind of how it goes over the next couple of weeks. I don't think they would want to ride Ronnie Rivers for like extended period of time if Kyron got hurt. So that's just kind of like how I'm viewing that right now. It's like a hold and kind of see how it all goes.
Yeah, it doesn't change anything for me. One note I would bring up is I think the Rams have like a week 4 bye week. And so you're going to have to see Kyron like maintain his health for like 3 months straight.
Yeah.
You know, with this massive workload, I think Blake Corum's season definitely could be coming. I'm not changing anything.
Yeah. You know, and I think like, yeah, it's a long season. We can't overreact too much to what happens in week 1, especially just like utilization. I mean, like last year,
It's the Rams though.
It is the Rams.
That's what they do. Like snip, snap, snip, snap. Like most dropped player after week 1. Blake Corum. What are we doing?
It's like funny because last year, was it last year when they brought like Daryl Henderson in and like just random, like, you know what I mean? They're just like a weird team when it comes to like utilizing their players. But I still kind of have to just go with everything they said during the offseason about Corum and like how they targeted him because they want to like take a load off of Kyron Williams and, you know, just kind of like play the long game. It's like last year, this is not the Rams, of course, but like, you know, Devon Achane, I think, was inactive last year in week 1. And so, you know, it's a long season. We got to figure out how like these things all shake out.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to go ahead.
I just on the other like handcuffs, none of them have really changed for me except for like maybe Zach Charbonnet. Because I was hoping he might be involved a little bit. And it's like in the first half, Kenneth Walker played 80% of the snaps.
Yeah. Which goes exactly in line with everything I heard during the offseason, both on the record and kind of off the record. You know, like Seahawks are enamored with Kenneth Walker. The problem is he has had core muscle injury issues in the past. I would not drop Charbonnet just yet, just because, you know, right now Walker is dealing with what he called like abdominal pain, I think he said it was. And, you know, he didn't practice on Wednesday. We're kind of like waiting to figure it out. I think there's optimism that he'll play from the team, but, you know, the core muscle injuries always kind of worry me because they don't really go away. And so, yeah, I think Charbonnet, you know, he has contingent upside. I don't think he's like a guy you want to probably stick in the flex too often, just because, yeah, they want to ride Walker, and Walker looked fantastic in week 1. I thought, you know, they were doing some interesting stuff with their blocking up front. And so, yeah, I'm heavy on Walker this year and hoping he can stay healthy, but I think Charbonnet still has that upside if Walker ends up being injured.
I'm going to give you guys some running back names, and I want to just a quick no. If anybody is like moved down, give me that no. Give me that down. Trey Benson, Jaleel McLaughlin, Jalen Wright, Bucky Irving, Kimani Vidal, Tyrone Tracy, Marshawn Lloyd, Sion Vaki. Have any of those handcuff guys moved down? Ray Davis.
Yeah, didn't they play Ty Johnson a bunch too?
He did. He makes in a little bit. I think if Cook was out, it would be both of them.
Yeah. I would say Trey Benson doesn't really move for me. You know, I think they mixed him in a little bit. They were giving him a couple of drives, which I think is like somewhat promising. Even though I think Connor's going to be the guy if he's healthy. Remind me some of the other names you said. Marshawn Lloyd, I'm still hanging on to, and he's out there on waivers with.
I think these people will get dropped. I don't understand. Yeah. It's like, why draft them in the first place? You weren't drafting them to play early in the season,
right? And he was like injured in the preseason anyway. So
to me, it's patience with all of these guys. Bucky Irving, Jaleel McLaughlin. I guess you can move down just because Denver's offense looks terrible. But honestly, he outrushed. He saw more carries than Javonte Williams. They started McLaughlin in the second half. I still don't know what that was about either.
This is so I was like coming into the season, I was like, man, I waffled on it because my first reaction was just like, I don't want to have to rely on Sean Payton's like, you know, mindset at any certain time on who he wants to be playing at whatever. Like he just to me seems like a guy who, you know, will put a guy in a doghouse if he does one little tiny thing wrong, and then he'll go with the other guy. It's like it's just really hard to trust how he's going to utilize these guys, especially now in his point at this point of his career. You know, but then I kind of like looked at the history of Sean Payton. His running backs have always produced. This is a quarterback that's going to dump it off to his running backs a lot. And so I kind of bought back into the Denver running backs. And now I'm just like, oh God, I don't even know what to do with these guys. The way they utilized McLaughlin was weird too, because he was like an early down guy for them. You know, he did catch some passes too, but they were utilizing him on early down. So yeah, I don't know what the vision is really for Sean McVay in this offense. I don't think it's not going to be a high scoring offense. So, I don't know what the ceiling is really for either of them, to be honest, at this point. It was a confusing first week.
Yeah, I mean, that's where you were asked to people. That's one player I moved down. I wasn't really high on McLaughlin to begin with. To me, the easiest way to kind of find a small edge or a cheat code, whatever you want to call it in fantasy, is just to avoid these types of backfields. Denver, Oakland, Las Vegas. I didn't have a single Zamir White share. I had no interest in that because
that's looking good. Yeah.
Here's a good reason why. Last week, James Cook had so many good runs. I watched his film. He looks awesome. He might be one
Yeah.
of the most I said he might be the most aesthetically pleasing runner to watch right now. His ability to maximize space, his understanding of how to set up blocks, and just the way he glides. It's kind of like the old Dalvin. But yet he finishes like RB24 because he didn't score a touchdown.
All
David
these awesome
Montgomery,
runs, it's like 0.4 points, 0.2 points, 0.6
yeah,
points.
no. It is that, but at the same time, the main thing is, and David Montgomery, the thing is, you need to score touchdowns in fantasy. That's just how the game is designed. It's 6 points for that touchdown. Jaleel McLaughlin is not scoring a lot of touchdowns this year. We can say that right now. Okay, and he's not a handcuff that's going to ever be like a workhorse back. So if the volume's not there, he's on a horrible offense that doesn't score a lot of touchdowns. I just have no interest in a player like that. It doesn't make and I did not see anything from Bo Nix in week 1. And I watched that tape that had me change my opinion of what it was, which I was very, very low on him to begin with.
Yeah.
So I just don't see the point of a player like that on my bench.
I mean, yeah, that's the worst like type of running back is, like you said, the committee back who's not going to score a lot of touchdowns in a bad offense, and they're going to be trailing a lot. I guess like the one thing where McLaughlin could,
catch passes.
Yeah, he could catch a lot of passes.
He's
And that's
Jalen Warren. He's Tyjae Spears
Yeah.
last year. He's that kind of running back. He could legitimately be top 5 in targets. If Javonte Williams went down and he was playing like 60% of the snaps and splitting with somebody else, he could see like 7-8 targets in some games.
Yeah.
I know that the offense sucked last week. Don't you think that will probably lead to more of the easy button stuff to the running backs? It was a bad matchup with a lot of like man press heavy aggressive defense.
Yeah.
I think we're going to see a lot more targets for them. I get what you're saying. It's like a small win, if it is a win at all, like the thesis behind Javonte and Jaleel. To me, it was just like, he's free. You're taking him around 14. He could be a PPR scammer. Let's go rapid fire on these next 5 questions. And then we've got some more open-ended discussion we want to end up with here.
Sweet.
Which rookie impressed you guys the most in week 1? Just give me one name.
I mean, I got to go with Brock Bowers, I think. You know, he coming in and immediately being like a big factor for them. He looked the part to me. Like he passed the eye test in terms of like his movement, his route running, a little bit of yards after the catch, like the way they utilized him. I don't know. I'm just feeling very bullish on what Brock Bowers can do long term. Like coming in and I guess like out producing Davante Adams in your first pro game is like a pretty good start. Not that that's necessarily going to happen every week, but yeah, I would say Brock Bowers just, you know, he's kind of, I feel like, flown under the radar a little bit in this pre-draft process or the preseason process, just because he's on a bad team. You know, they didn't really know. People are down on it because they have 2 good tight ends, and I get all that stuff. But based on week 1, it feels like they're going to make him a featured part of their offense. Like they're going to move him around and draw him up plays where, you know, they're wanting him to get open and run after catch. So Brock Bowers, I would say, stood out for me as like a potential. Honestly, like a potential top 5 tight end this year.
Yeah,
like,
so one of my rapid fire questions was, let's find the right range for Brock Bowers rest of the season. So let's just do that. Like who do you think is the top tight end you can see yourself moving him ahead of after week 2? If Dalton Kincaid doesn't play well,
like Kincaid,
if Kyle Pitts doesn't play well.
Because that's the same. He's gonna potentially be what we hoped Kincaid would be, and what we hope McBride would be.
Right? Yeah.
Which are these target monsters.
Not nearly as good of an offense as Kincaid. Like much less touchdown upside.
Right.
Yes, possibly. I didn't really like what I've seen from Kyler, and I've got a lot of skepticism about him. But yes, agreed. And that was the thought with Kincaid as well. But he's got more of a defined role, I think, than anyone but McBride out of that top bunch. And guess what? This is a rookie. Like you don't see this a lot with tight ends. Like rookie tight ends having an offense designed around, able to execute all those different things in one game. That's what has me most excited about him, because I can't really remember.
This is another instance where I think the matchup was perfect, though, to dictate this type of result. And I think that's important to know. Are you, as of right now, are you like Brock Bowers or Evan Ingram? Brock Bowers or Jake Ferguson?
Bowers.
If you had to choose, you're taking Bowers.
I was already had Bowers. I had them preseason personally. I just
Bowers or Kittle?
Bowers.
I think I would
really
Bowers. Honestly, yeah. There's like too many mouths to feed in San Francisco.
I was already at that point before. He was like my tight end 7 or 6 before the year, just behind like the guys.
I'm on the fence with Ingram though. I think obviously week 1 was not good, but it's hard to ignore what he did last year in terms of just target volume, overall target volume.
Bowers are likely.
Bowers for me.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, just because of the. You know, I think it'll even out. Mark Andrews was doubled almost every snap last game. And I think that was like a specific game plan thing that, you know, the Chiefs wanted to take him away and make someone else beat them. Ultimately, it did work. It was close to not working. It probably shouldn't have worked, but, you know, likely ended up being on the end line, unfortunately. So, yeah, and Njoku's out for a while, so I'd move him ahead of him. Like Jake Ferguson, I would move him ahead of him. Obviously, I don't even know. Like, I think I still probably would rather have Bowers than Pitts at this point. Where do you land on the Pitts situation? Because
The Pitts
Kirk Cousins did
situation,
not inspire confidence.
that's
If
the
I
thing,
if
dude.
I had to pick right now, I would take Bowers because I think there's a real chance that his perceived value continues to just balloon.
Right.
Whereas like Pitts and Atlanta, it's gonna be terrible. I
I
actually
want
like
to
the
talk
matchup all
Atlanta
right
at
this
the end.
week.
I want to get into a deeper
We're
dive on
gonna
Atlanta,
yeah.
so I'm not going to get there now. So we'll talk with you about that in a second. Just to quickly answer your question, Jacob, you said rapid fire, but we don't
Yeah.
do anything. We're
Yeah,
not
I know.
rapid
Well,
fire.
well,
Kind of
hard
guys.
to do that.
we ended up
Hard to do
knocking
None
out
of us
we
are
ended up
rapid
knocking
fire
out
kind of guys.
two questions here. So
We're
we
not
can
a
we can
rapid
rapid
fire
fire from there.
bunch.
We can do it. We can do it.
But I'm going to do this quick. For me, it was the guy who came into this draft as my wide receiver 4 overall after the big 3. So I was so excited to see him look as good as he did on tape. He was one of the first guys I watched when we got to Monday and I was doing the tape review. It's AD Mitchell. And this is what I
wow.
saw
So you're
on
going
tape.
Brian Thomas Jr. Okay, yes,
No,
I
no,
love it.
I had AD ahead of Brian Thomas. BTJ was
Wow.
my 5th. Yeah, I know that was a little bit of a interesting thing. I just felt like they were very similar prospects, but I felt like AD Mitchell did a better job on the comeback routes and in breaking routes of getting in and out of his breaks than Brian Thomas did. A little bit more of a fluid mover in that regard. But man, did he look good on that turf in week 1 running those routes. And it was just like he did at Texas. Like you could spot so many different clips because I watched so much of it of AD Mitchell at Texas and not Colt. I was about to say Colt McCoy. Quinn Ewers just airmailing passes where Mitchell is just dominating these routes, just absolutely torching these DBs in these one-on-one situations. And then you heard the Colts general manager say it after he drafted him. He was like, we know what this league is about. It's about isolating one-on-one matchups and then having a guy who can win those one-on-one matchups. That's
Dan said he
exactly
was
what
going to
AD
rapid
Mitchell
fire.
is. Yeah, and now it's over. I'm done.
AD Mitchell, number 1 in average separation score per fantasy points data.
Yeah, I love that. I love
I
that.
hate that.
I can go rapid fire. BTJ all day. Brian Thomas Jr. easily
Good
the most
boy.
impressed. He's so good.
He was very impressive.
Number 3, any player, not just rookies, who is going to break out in a big way in week 2. For me, it is a rookie, Jalen McMillan. Love the matchup, love the role, love the talent. Go get him. He's available in some leagues still. Go get him.
I mean, he's locked into that number 3 role. It seems like they're wanting to play 11 personnel. I mean, obviously this is like a Rams type offense under Liam Cohen. And so, I love that one. I think Jalen McMillan is just like one of those really steady, just good route runner, good hands, very tough, versatile type of guy, not like super flashy, but he just produces everywhere, whenever he's healthy. And so, I like that one. You actually stole my answer, Dan. I was going to say AD Mitchell just because, he had, I think, a couple big bombs down the field that just were overthrown. Maybe this is like a little too giving me flashbacks to Quinn Ewers, but like, he looked really good. I think he was I know we're doing rapid fire, but he was like the hardest guy for me to evaluate in this pre-draft process. Like when I was doing the actual draft guide, because like, I don't want to completely trust my eyes. Like I like to like rely on a little bit of like the stats and the metrics and the advanced analytics about, what type of like receivers in college end up being good in the pros. And so I rely a little bit on that, but like, I loved his tape so much. I was like, this guy just so twitchy, so quick.
He's crazy,
like incredible body control, good route runner. He kind of like reminded me of like a George Pickens type, but then like every single graph that you see for like production, he's like bottom left, like by a lot. And I'm
Nothing
just
like it.
I just don't know what to do with him. And so I ended up like, unfortunately, ranking him lower than I should have, I think, because I loved him from a tape standpoint, but I just didn't know what to do with him. And so I'm already having like regret about that.
Well, I don't blame you because look, I rely so heavily on the tape for my evaluations and it can get you burned a lot in those situations.
I know.
He's not through the woods just yet. Let's see, because obviously there were some.
I was going to say like a little bit of cold water. I don't love the matchup this week against Green Bay. A lot of zone heavy schemes there. Next week, he has a tough matchup individually against Chicago. Then he has Pittsburgh, which is also a tough matchup individually. And then Josh Downs is back. So I just
good point. Good point. Yeah, I like Downs a lot too. And he was getting a lot of hype in the preseason. So
Dan,
that's
who's
fair.
your week 2 breakout?
For me, it's Xavier Worthy, especially with a little bulletin board material from the Bengals DB who made the mistake of saying all he can do is run vertical routes.
What are we doing?
This is the exact matchup actually against this style of defense, the Bengals scheme, where you could see him on those deep crossers. And I think we're going to see Mahomes hit Worthy on a deep crosser or two, and it's going to be fun because once you get him the ball in space on that deep crosser, he's gone. And also, like, we talked about this, Jacob. When we watched his tape at Texas, this wasn't just a dude running go routes the entire time and running end arounds and jet sweeps. He was actually tough over the middle, tougher than most of these guys who fit his profile. Not obviously the toughest player, but tougher than most of these guys and pretty good at the catch point. So I think this is going to be a huge week for Worthy, and I'm so excited about it.
All right, next one. Very quickly, I just want to name, which tight end are you most concerned about out of Mark Andrews, Dalton Kincaid, Travis Kelce?
Wow.
Man, maybe Kelsey. I think like from a just utilization and spread the football around point of view, like Kelsey.
If Rice's role is going to be so big.
I know, and like the Chiefs have actual real reasons to just kind of like load manage him.
He did play a lot. He didn't necessarily get load managed. He did play a lot, and I think that's important. Dan, you're Kelsey too, I think.
Unfortunately, it's Kincaid, and I was highest on Kincaid of anybody preseason. I watched that tape, and I was just like, damn it, it's the same thing from Joe Brady. I'm not actually as big a Joe Brady fan as others, but it's fine. I think I understand what he's trying to do, and I understand his concepts. But like, they're going to run the football all the freaking time.
Yep.
Because that's the box that when you're matched up against Josh Allen, your defensive coordinator, you're only playing him one way. And it's not top down. It's the opposite. You're putting guys back and you're giving them space, and they're just going to run into those kind of boxes all day because that's what Joe Brady wants to do. So then it just scares me as far as what Dalton Kincaid's going to get from a target volume standpoint.
Yeah. Kincaid is my answer too, just because they're running. Okay, next one. Atlanta Falcons, Tennessee Titans, Carolina Panthers, Washington Commanders. Which offense do you feel the least bad about after week 1?
Man, that's tough. I guess I'd lean the Titans. I don't know. I would say like the Falcons will probably end up being fine. Like I think Kirk Cousins will probably just like, he's just rusty coming off of this Achilles. Like they basically didn't move him off his spot at all. Maybe that will improve over the next couple of weeks as he gets a little more healthy. So obviously I would say the Falcons, but then I'm just worried that this injury is like, he's a 37-year-old guy or whatever he is. And that is a little bit worrisome. So I don't know. I would say the Titans, Will Levis is just an adventure every time he steps on the football field. He's still going to air it out. I think they're going to, there was some flashes of good stuff there with like Pollard. And I think they'll get healthier with their receivers. So I don't know. I'd say, that's a really tough question because all of those offenses look bad. And you can get like some value, of course, from Jaden Daniels, but he was so bad as a passer that it kind of like, takes Terry McLaurin. Like I can't start Terry McLaurin next week. Like
I think there's a real chance that like literally no one in Washington is worth anything except for Jaden McDaniels for fantasy.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't know. I still feel like I could start Pollard. I still feel like I could start Ridley, even though it didn't really work out in week 1.
I was bummed we didn't see any motion. Ridley didn't have a single route in motion.
Yep.
Yeah, that's bizarre.
What were my options again, Jacob?
Atlanta, Tennessee, Washington, and Carolina. Wow. For me, it's Atlanta. I think we've got outs. We've got either Kirk Cousins gets better, gets healthier, or Penix is actually good. There's so much talent. The coaching could be good. It's pretty easy. The other ones are like, I don't know. It seems like it's over already.
It's not going to be Carolina for me, and it's not going to be Tennessee for me. I've made my bold proclamation. I'm sticking by it. I think Will Levis is Daniel Jones, but with a bigger arm and not as fast as a runner, which is not what you want to be in fantasy. It's hard to keep a passing game going. It's the timing is off. Everything is just terrible. I'll go Atlanta just because. But look, if this is like my whole issue with going Atlanta here, and I'll keep this brief, is like we watched last year. What happens to an offense when your quarterback can't push off one foot with Joe Burrow and the Bengals, and they had to run everything out of shotgun, and it's really so easy to scheme against as a defensive coordinator. So that's what happened in week 1 with Atlanta. Cousins obviously couldn't do anything. Is that just supposed to like heal over a week, or like how does that get better? What's our time frame for him being able to run the full offense? Because for Burrow, it took a while. And maybe they even needed a bye week. I don't remember when he finally got to the point where they were running their full offense. But like he's going to go into this thing week in and week out, Cousins. He's older than Burrow ever was coming off this injury. He's going to get more nicks and bruises. So like I'm just very open-ended and concerned about like how this heals, when it heals. Like, is it a 1 week thing? Like, because he just did not look healthy at all last week.
0 play action, right? I think I saw they had no play action. It was like very static.
Super predictable. I loved this tweet I saw from Charles McDonald of Yahoo Fantasy 4verts on Twitter. He's like, dang, Bijan looks absolutely incredible. And then you look at the box score, he has 18 for 68, 3.8 per carry, 13 long. And
because here's the deal. There was the clip where they tried to run boot with a fake bootleg action with Kirk Cousins. And it was so late in the game that the Steelers, TJ Watt, did not respect it at all, crashed right downhill and took out Bijan. And if that's the example of what kills you. When you can't run your boot, like you have no threat of Kirk Cousins actually booting out, it's over for your run game because you're just going to have defensive ends crashing down every single time.
I wonder if this Penix pick is going to end up actually looking pretty
But that's
smart.
the other thing. You can't play him yet because of the politics. So like you're stuck with this injured version of Cousins because you can't be like, all right, we'll go to Penix because Cousins, and then it's like
I do think it might look smart though.
Penix has
I thought
a
it
good
looked
game.
great. I thought it looked great this preseason.
The signing of Kirk Cousins is what's going to go down as like the really terrible decision.
So strange.
Yeah, not the Penix decision, right?
Yeah.
Exactly.
So it's gonna be interesting.
That's
it's hard to choose.
But have the draft before free agency. I don't understand why the NFL does it that way. If you had the draft before free agency, you never have that Cousins decision.
All right, should we take another break? Move on to these last.
Yeah, let's take another quick break to hear a word from our sponsors. Then we're going to wrap up with one more segment when we get right back.
Can I get a spot real quick?
Yeah, sure, man. Hey, wait a minute. You're Dave Richard from FFT.
Yeah.
Hey, I snagged Alvin Kamara in the 4th round. What do you think?
Is it PPR?
Yeah, full point.
All right, we're back. Jacob,
I love that one. My favorite part of that is the obscene amount of weight. I didn't notice that until like the second time I watched it.
Shout out Dave Richard.
Love that.
All right, Jacob, where are we wrapping up here? Where are we going for this final segment?
Okay, so I wanted to talk about Arizona's offense. We actually did that a little bit. So I just want to highlight McBride. If you search my Twitter name with Trey McBride, you'll find a cut up of all his targets. And he had 29% target share. He was getting downfield looks. I'm not worried about him at all. Like among all the tight ends, he remains tight end 1 for me. I think he's going to be a focal point of this offense. If you're worried about MHJ, then that probably means more targets for McBride. If you're not worried about MHJ, then that means he's going to be the superstar that we thought he was. Who's going to open things up for McBride. So like, I think he's the tight end 1. Especially if you think Jameson Williams is going to cut into Sam Laporta's work at all, which Dan has kind of brought up. That might be what happens here. The upcoming matchups for Arizona are really good too. Rams, and then probably a shootout against Detroit, and then they get Washington's defense. So like now is probably the time to buy any of these Arizona guys if you have conviction about any of them.
Love that.
Okay, so I heard, I'm pretty sure it was you, Danny, said that San Francisco's offense is more fun with Jordan Mason.
Yeah.
I love this take. I love this take.
I'm just like, I'd rather watch, this is like, of course, a little bit tongue in cheek because Christian McCaffrey is one of the most fun players to watch, period. Yeah. But the offense is just more fun when Christian McCaffrey's not in there because then they spread it around. You get Deebo Samuel backfield snaps. Right. They are much more creative with how they utilize Deebo Samuel. Deebo Samuel is super fun to watch. And of course, you get more looks for the receivers in theory. Obviously, like they still ran the ball a ton in this last game because they were leading the whole game. But yeah, I don't know. I was like, it's kind of tongue in cheek, but also not. Like it's just more fun when Christian McCaffrey's not in there and they're spreading the ball out a little bit. They have such great skill players. So get that ball hog out of here.
And which is hilarious because Mason had like 42%.
I know,
which was I think would have been like the 4th or 5th highest total for CMC last year.
Yeah,
so I just
maybe it's a bad take. Who knows? Yeah,
I love him as a player, man. He looks so good. He looks so good in the preseason. He looked like the same guy with a huge workload here. The stats back it up. It's tongue in cheek here too, but like better than Christian McCaffrey during their regular season respective opportunities. So like, where are you guys at right here? Rest of season, because like I think to me he has emerged from this tier of Ray Davis's and Zach Charbonnet's.
Oh yeah.
And he really smells like a league winner. It feels like Kyron Puka at the beginning of the year, where it's like we don't know how much we want to go in on it. Obviously, we don't. We hope CMC comes back, but there's plenty of reason to be concerned about what's going on with the injury reporting and them adding Achilles to the injury and all of that. So if you just have to choose, if you're drafting today, rest of the season, do you go Mason over Brian Robinson?
Oh man, it's just so tough because Chris McCaffrey could play like this weekend and then like completely like annihilate Mason's value at all. But like the contingency up, like the ceiling upside is so much higher. Like you said, he could be an actual league winner, score 20+ points a week. And, then you're giving up that opportunity for a guy like I actually thought Brian Robinson looked pretty good this week 1. And the way they utilized him was like oh, like he might be actually like a bigger part of the fantasy world than I thought, just because he was catching passes. They were, giving the ball a ton. He was getting the goal line looks and things like that. So it didn't feel like they were using Eckler quite as much as I expected. So I don't know. I probably like, it just depends on your team. I'd probably say like Brian Robinson, the conservative one, is just because you don't know how long Mason's going to be around. If you're like, I got a pretty good starting lineup and I just want to have this like potential lottery piece, I would go with Mason just because of that upside. If Chris McCaffrey gets hurt, aggravates his injury, they just end up like basically not doing much with him during the regular season, saving until the end of the year. Mason will be like you said, that Kyron Williams type of guy.
I have him in the range of like Bucky Irving right now.
I just think there's so much more upside. It's the best. It's like maybe the best offense in the whole league.
Right.
We saw exactly what it could be in week 1. I think to me, he's like in this Brian Robinson tier, Jerome Ford.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think about him compared to like Zach Moss?
I would probably have Mason over Moss just because there's a lot of question marks as to whether the Bengals offense will like actually end up being good. I think, you know what I mean? Like I'm sort of in the camp where I believe Burrow will be fine and end up looking pretty good after all this speculation in the preseason of whether he can throw and all that. But maybe I'm just being too optimistic. And, obviously they did not look good the first week. They're still rotating it. Like it's still a committee there. Their offensive line is banged up already. So I don't know. I would just say, again, the upside play, if you don't need a guy like to start right away, if this is like, you're talking like your bench type of players, I would definitely lean Mason. But again, the rug could be pulled out from Mason like next week, and then he's like worthless the rest of the year. So it's just like tough. Yeah. It's like a really tough call.
It is such a tough call. I drafted McCaffrey in my biggest league, my home league auction, and spent a bunch on him. And then somebody outbid me for Mason, and he was trying to trade me him, but he wanted so much. And then I see today on the league page, he did get traded. He got a good return back, but I was like, I couldn't afford to take that risk. I thought it was better situation for me to just be like, hopefully this McCaffrey situation is okay after 2 weeks.
It's funny because, during the preseason, I think we're like one of the only places that ranked McCaffrey as like it was like our 7th or 8th player or whatever. Okay. Like we were like the outliers. Wow. And I actually like talked to the guys. I was like, are you sure like we want to do this? I actually ended up ranking him. I think I had him like 2nd or 3rd because I was like, he's probably going to be fine. Like this calf thing isn't that big of a deal. There's no reporting that he's not going to make it back. And I was just like, let's, just go with the guy who scored 100 more points than the second best running back last year and just, like, trust it. And then now I'm like, holy crap. Like he might actually miss like huge chunks of the season. And it might be like best for the 49ers for him to do that because like why they're such a dominant offense, why would they really risk him over the next like month, really, honestly, like they, unless they really start to falter, it just probably makes more sense for them to sit it, which is, would support Jacob's thought that like he's super, super valuable.
Would you consider like trading for Mason? Like if you have Ramondre Stevenson or something, and you might be able to turn like Stevenson into Mason plus, do you think that makes sense? I guess it kind of depends on what your other running back depth is like and stuff. But like, is he somebody who you would actively pursue?
Probably not. He's the guy that I would hold. Most likely, and just like hope it turns into a lottery ticket. But I don't know if I'm like got the balls to like go trade for him just because, like I said, it's so hard to know. Like he could just, and there's not again, there hasn't been like that good of reporting on like what's going on with this. Like we didn't even know it was an Achilles until week 1. And I think
it's so interesting because like I think this is where everyone's at is we don't know what to do with it, and it's like
opportunity.
I loved what we saw from Ramondre. I loved what we saw from the Patriots. It was surprising, but it was also against the Bengals, who have one of the worst run defenses. If you've got a guy like that who you probably drafted with almost no expectations, and you can like turn it into a legit like potential Kyron Williams type of player, like I think that's interesting. You know what I mean? Like, and you might have people who like get that trade offer and they're like, oh, I can turn Jordan Mason. He's like nothing basically. He's free ticket that I got. I can like cash it in and get somebody good. Ramondre Stevenson. I see all these usage metrics from week 1. I think that's interesting. Aaron Jones, where it's like, I don't know if I love Aaron Jones to death, but I don't know if I trust that he's going to be there for me at the end of the year. Maybe you can turn Aaron Jones into, Rashid Shaheed and Jordan Mason or something like that. Like I think that's really, really interesting to think about.
It's also just like a game theory kind of thing. Like, do you want to are you trying to go for 6th place or are you trying to just like win the whole thing? or do you like not just you just don't want to get last in your league? Like it just kind of all comes down to like how aggressive you are. And so yeah, I do like the idea though, like because he gives you that true league winning, like he could be a top 5 running back based on the way they utilized him, based on the fact they don't really have anyone else behind him at this point. Like
Yeah.
you know, who's even the backups, like Garendo, or is it I'm like blanking on who the other guy they have
It
now.
is for now.
Patrick something from
There's
the
one more
Packers
other.
last
Yeah.
year.
Exactly.
Who,
We don't even know. That's the sign. That's the sign.
Yeah,
right
yeah,
there. All right. Thank you so much, Danny, for joining us today. It was fun to talk a little football with you. I love
Yeah.
getting into it. I know you watch the tape. I know you deep dive into this stuff as well. For everybody else, please, if you enjoy the show, help us grow the show by liking and subscribing to Fantasy Football Today Express, and then leave a review. Okay, if you want to help us, this is how it goes. When you start a new show like this, like Jacob and I are doing, we need feedback. We need people to help us grow. That's just the reality of the situation. So you can watch, that'll help us. You can subscribe, that'll help us. But go to the Fantasy Football Today Express iTunes page or Spotify and leave a rating and review and mention this show Beyond the Box Score. And that's how you do it for us. And it's free for you. It'll take you a minute or two, but it'll really help us. So thank you so much. Everybody have a great
check out the Ringer podcast.
And check out the Ringer project.
I'm on rotation
about that.
to 3 to 5 each week, depending on how much time I have, and it's definitely on my rotation.
I love that. I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
And have a great rest of your weekend, everyone, and we'll talk to you soon.